Hey, welcome back everybody. Windows Azure Websites Deep Dive, Jumpstart, get your feet wet, hands dirty. We're right into it now. This is the thick of things. We have actually looked at bringing a site live. We've gone through all the steps we need for securing, configuring, all these kinds of things, but there's still a really important question here, Tej, and that is, how do I bring a site that's actually live and already running?
How? So how do you migrate your existing
How do I migrate it to the cloud?
Yes, sustainability, right?
Exactly.
Sustaining what you have, reducing your operating costs by moving it to the cloud.
And figuring out if Windows Azure Websites is the right place for you to go.
So it's not a silver bullet. So this module is about capabilities, right? About case studies, right? So I will cover something called website capability model, which I've built based on my years of experience. Then I will cover how to migrate the popular music store web app. It's a website, it's an MVC sample app. How do you take it live and add on more features on top of it, right? And the next one is dynamicdeploy.com. So I don't know whether we'll be able to cover this or not, but it's in the slide deck, it's in my book, it's all covered.
Right.
So don't worry, you can always go back.
Exactly. So we're gonna start right off real quick. We're gonna get into figuring out what this actually is. What is the website capability model?
So it's a list of core technical capabilities required by a website. So let's say you have an e-commerce application running. Let's take an example of music store, right? So you have an e-commerce application running in your data center, but it's expensive. You cannot scale up, you cannot scale down, you cannot scale up in holiday season, but you want to take that, leverage the advantage of the cloud platform. But there are constraints because your website is tied to your data center. It's designed for your data center. So there are going to be some efforts required in migrating that website. So the website capability model enables you to list out all those capabilities, look at the current state of those capabilities in your data center or anywhere else where it is running currently, and then look at the future state. And so these are the most common capabilities, and you can extend it, right? So this ties back into your checklist. So this is like a checklist, but you look at this checklist before you look at the application, before making the decision itself.
Right. So from one aspect, you could actually probably look at starting here and then use that to help build out your checklist even as part of it. But one thing to point out is that this isn't talking about I need not necessarily the things that are happening on the server level or the infrastructure level. It's what am I required at the platform level and inside my application.
And in some cases even business level, right? So let's say session management, e-commerce, these are business level components. They affect your business. So making sure that those components are stable in all the states, in the current state as well as future state of your application.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's start looking at this. We've got 3 slides. We're going to look at the first one a little more critically.
Yeah, we're going to look at the most critical ones.
Exactly.
And the rest are available as slides anyways.
For sure.
So one point I wanted to make is identity is the key. That is the glue for your website, whether it's in your data center or in the cloud. Now, why this is critical? Why has identity become critical in the past 4 to 5 years? It is because it's gone viral. So 10 years back, there were only few identities, right? So every person had only a few identities. Maybe you had a live account and maybe Hotmail account and maybe a couple of other accounts.
Passport.
Yeah. But now, one person has at least 10, 15 identities, right? So you have a Facebook identity, then you might have a fake Facebook identity, you have a Twitter identity, you have your organization's Twitter identity, you might have Pinterest identity. So basically you have gone viral from identity perspective, and your website needs to support that because all those are your users.
Exactly.
Right? So each and every user now has multiple identities, and you need to support those.
Identity was also something that you would have needed to almost control top to bottom, and the process of authentication was something that you had to handle within your application, and now it's something that you kind of use. Authentication is almost a protocol now, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of outsourcing, right? So you're outsourcing the authentication to the Twitters of the world or to the Microsoft accounts of the world, right? So when the user logs into your website, you are shown, okay, log in using Twitter. Now what happens behind the scenes is it goes into the OAuth protocol mode, right? So the user approves access of that application to your Twitter account, to the user's Twitter account.
For the features that you
requested. For the features that you requested. And then Twitter sends claims or tokens to your website. And in your website, now you assume you trust Twitter because there is some key handshake that goes in there. So you trust Twitter identity, what Twitter is sending you. And then you look at that token, and now you have an authenticated user. So you trust what you're getting from Twitter. You have the authenticated user. Now you have to authorize the user, right? So authorization is still your problem because that's a business level decision, not typically a technical level decision.
Right. So identity doesn't go away then. It's still something that's really important to our application because we're going to need to bind that externally authenticated user. And there's business drivers there as well because you want your users to be promoting your site on Facebook. And if they're logging in with Facebook credentials, that means that you can be augmenting the experience there. But we still need to authorize them inside of our application. So it's important to denote the difference between authentication and authorization, and this we take that into account as part of this
identity management, right? So identity management includes both, and you have to do work because if your website is old, typically it has some kind of a membership API which ties into a database backend. But now you want to modernize the website. You want to support that viral social phenomenon, right? So in that case, you have to basically enable your website to authenticate your users against these social systems.
Exactly.
So that's why identity is important. It's not just about migration, but it's about your future direction, the future state of your website.
So there's actually, it's a really hybrid requirement because there's business application here. There's, and if you do it wrong, then it can affect business. If you have to migrate users over to a new platform. We were talking yesterday about a scenario. I was involved in a project that had 20,000 user accounts with about 10% of that population active, but because of a bad migration strategy, only 200 of those users re-registered, and there was no easy way to migrate their data, and that had a huge impact, going from 2,000 to 200 registered regular users.
And let me tell you one thing, right? So identity is number one on the list in terms of user experience. If you don't provide the proper authentication workflow to the end user, nobody's going to use your website. Right, so that's why identity is important. So let's go to the next.
There's a few more important things here that we want to cover off. So session management, we talked about that before. Whether or not we're using sticky.
Think about shopping cart, right? Users have put their shopping objects in the shopping cart, and you have designed your website in such a way that a shopping cart is a session object.
Right.
Then you have to make sure that shopping cart, every virtual instance of your application knows that shopping cart for that user.
So depending on how you have it implemented, that might affect whether or not you're able to go. If you're using a COM component, for example, that starts to get really hairy to try and migrate that without a lot of rework. Caching, data storage, these are also important things.
Data storage, right? So I would also put data storage up there, right? So after identity, it's the data storage. So these are the two things, basically. If I had to list it, in priority order, it's identity and then the data storage, right? So if you nail down data storage early on in your architecture, you're good to go. Right? Because you want to take advantage of the data storage systems in the cloud. You don't want to just migrate it, right? Because it's just running in your data center or cloud. It doesn't make a difference unless you take the advantage of that.
Exactly. Now, there's inside of this, what you've created here in the website capability model, there's actually over 25 points, or over 20 points anyways, that probably need to be considered, and it's kind of a thorough dive. Let's have a look here really quickly through them. We'll plow through them. We've talked about identity session management and data storage, caching, obviously important there as well. The user experience, the runtime environment. Are you using .NET? Which version of it? What can your expectations be?
Data security at rest, in transit. Right, so we covered in transit, which was mostly HTTPS. But at rest, how does your current environment encrypt? Right, so I was working on an application where they were using ASP encrypt COM object to encrypt some of the data. So now, how do you migrate that into your new environment?
Exactly.
Right, so all that needs to be taken care of. Load balancing.
When you talk about that and scaling up, scaling out, how we're going to monitor it, whether or not we require certain features of geo-based deployment and using content distribution networks. There's a message bus, whether or not you're going to be able to communicate across network boundaries or use a hybrid.
Or data center boundaries, right? Application your subscription boundaries, application boundaries, data center boundaries, right? So all these are different boundaries.
Exactly. And then there's integration with external APIs. We've got configuration management, how we're going to use search analytics, e-commerce.
Search is huge. Search is huge.
Absolutely.
It's underrated, but it's huge. Every website needs search today.
So let's have a look at this as we would apply it to the Music Store web app. Now, this is the canonical example of how you learn to program inside of MVC. So a lot of developers on the ASP.NET Stack are going to be familiar with this, and the concept is simple enough that most developers with some MVC type framework experience would be able to plow through it.
Like Cloud Survey, this is available for free on codeplex.com, and you can just download it from codeplex.com and start using it.
And the architecture is nice and simple. So after you pull the project down after Codeplex, you can run it fairly simply locally. The architecture is really...
It's simple. So if you look at the architecture diagram, there is this website, which is ideal for Windows Azure websites. There is a shopping cart, which is in the session. And then there is a SQL C. Because this was a sample application, it was designed using SQL Compact. So SQL C is SQL Compact Edition.
Right.
And then there is a membership API, typical to legacy applications where authentication and authorization is in the membership provider. Your membership provider uses backend database to store user identities.
So all of a sudden, your manager calls and the marketing department says, we have a cloud strategy, deploy to Azure.
Right now.
So
yesterday.
Because that's how that happens. Okay. So now what do we do? What's the first thing that we do? We need to make sure we identify.
Yeah, exactly.
Our
we just learned. Yeah, we just learned. Build a capability model, right? So what is the current state? Single machine, right? Future state is Windows Azure website, right? So let's look at the key points. We don't have to go into all of these. So the key one, as I said earlier, right? It's identity management. Currently, it's membership API. In the first stage of migration, let's keep to membership API. Let's first get it going, and then we can enable social identities, right? So let's first make it work. And the next thing is session management. Currently, it's in memory, which is typical because a lot of web applications are still running behind hardware firewalls using sticky sessions and dependent on in-memory sessions. Right?
Exactly.
And then in the future state, right, let's look at how we can leverage Windows Azure Shared Cache or Windows Azure SQL Database for distributed sessions. Right?
Okay, we talked about caching as well. There's some opportunity for us to do some things there, but data storage is the other one that we really want to address, right?
Because there are two databases here, right? So one is a SQL C database, which is the application database mvcmusicstore.sdf, and then the next one is SQL Azure database, right? Or the SQL Server database. In the future state, it is going to be Windows Azure SQL database. And basically, we want to combine both of these databases into one database in Azure. Because I think to start with, it's a great strategy, just to make it work, first stage, and make sure you have all the features running.
Excellent. So there's still everything else that we need: user experience, the runtime requirements, security, everything to do with load balancing, scale, monitoring, diagnostics, geo deployment. These things are still important. We've got to talk about CDN, message bus, integration, search, analytics,
but we want to add search. So there are two things we want to add in the cloud. Is we want to add search feature and custom analytics feature, because we don't want to share our data with some advertising provider, right? So we want to have our custom analytics engine serving multiple of our websites, not just this one.
So we're going to redesign the architecture here to meet our requirements for this, and it's going to look a little bit different.
Yeah, I would readjust. If you see, it's not a complete redesign,
right?
But it's a readjust. So if you see, we are still using membership API, we're still using the shopping cart.
Oops, sorry about that.
Go back, thank you. And now we are pointing to Azure SQL database. And then we are going to use Elasticsearch for our search and browse functionality.
So that's extending the features.
Yeah, Elasticsearch is an open source search engine, my favorite, because it's designed for the cloud.
Right.
And it runs wonderfully in Windows Azure. And the next one is Piwik, which is an open source analytics engine, which we can plug into our website to capture user analytics. Right? So how do you make this happen? So this is our future state architecture. So this is a checklist.
Right.
Simple checklist for this session. Let's go through it. So first is migrating the databases, 800-pound gorilla. You have to get this done. Right? Without this, nothing works. Right? Your search is not going to work. Your authentication is not going to work because everything is in the database. And right now it is tied to the application. Right? So let's migrate the application database, then the membership database, then look at the session management, and then look at Elasticsearch and analytics. So first, let's get our site there up and running,
Yeah.
and then add new features.
So we're going to come back to this list a couple of times here and
Yeah.
show how our progress is made. The first piece is going to be addressing the database, and there are two databases here. We're going to merge them into one, or we're going to at least leverage one final database kind of in our final architecture here,
Yeah.
and we're going to need to change some configuration. We're going to do some migration. So let's start with that
Awesome.
right
Yeah,
now.
let's go there. So first thing is MVC Music Store SDF. So to be honest, I've never worked with SQL Compact database before. I just never had the opportunity. So when I looked at this database, I couldn't open it in SQL Management Studio locally. So I was kind of confused. And I did some Bing search, and I found out this tool, which is freely available on Codeplex. I downloaded it. It exported my database into SQL file.
Excellent. So
Simple as
that generated a SQL script then that you could later use to actually recreate
Yeah.
the database in something that was easier to move to
And
the
the
cloud.
script consisted of schema as well as data.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Okay.
both of the things, right? So this is how I went about doing it, right? So MVC Music, I exported that script into a local SQL Server database.
Okay. Excellent. So
Right? So if you see, all the tables were created, right? So this is local database. This is not SQL Azure yet.
Right.
So let's go to the next.
So why didn't you go right to SQL Azure then? There was something that you came across really quickly,
Yeah,
right?
so the thing is, there is a constraint. So cloud gives you constraints, and as a good developer, right, you always want to work within the constraints. I like to work within the constraints, right? I don't want to start working on stuff beyond 12 a.m.
I don't know.
Because I want to spend time with my family.
You seem like a rule breaker to me, though. I don't know.
Okay, so you want to operate within the constraints, and this enforces you to use best practices, to apply best practices. So what SQL Azure does is it requires each and every table of yours to have a clustered index. Now, the file that we exported from SQL CE, either it lost its index or it did not create an index in its file. So if you run that file directly onto SQL Azure, you will get this error showing that, oh, you need a clustered index. So it's an additional step. And if you don't like to see errors, just load it locally in SQL Express and then use deploy to SQL Azure Wizard.
Right.
So let's go back to the slide deck.
Sure. And we're going to have a look at that. And basically,
Yeah.
it's just part of the tooling inside of SSMS, right?
Yeah, so this is in your local SQL Management Studio in SQL Server 2012. You right click on the database and use deploy database to SQL Azure.
Right.
Now, the local database has automatically created clustered index for me. So it's smart enough to detect that this table doesn't have a clustered index. Let me create one for you. So that avoids some headache for you.
Okay. So we're
And
going to.
then this is the wizard. You just next add your SQL Azure connection string here. Make sure your firewall is open.
Right.
Yeah. And these are standard dialogues for adding the database. Let's move to the next
Moving
slide.
here. Yeah. And then
User-
just some more standard
Yeah, select
dialogues
between
here.
web and business editions of the SQL
Right.
Server.
And we're
I
just
chose web.
next.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there you go. The operation is complete. Now
So we get a list of everything that it needed to do, processing tables, et cetera,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden over here, back into the management portal, we
you
actually
see the database live in the portal.
Exactly, right on.
So-
Okay, so
Yeah.
pretty easy to pull off, although it might take some time depending on the size of your data that you have.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that's why you need a plan.
Now we've got another step here that we need to do is to modify the web config.
So now the database is up there. Go back to the web application, modify the web config to point to your SQL Azure database and run it locally. So
Right.
just to test it, right?
Yeah.
Run the web app locally, whether it's connecting to the SQL Azure database or not before publishing.
Right.
So modify your connection string. This is how it should look
And then
locally.
make sure that it's working before you carry on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. That's
Okay.
a local host. Let's move to this was just one database.
Right. So there can be a lot of work there in just getting that first one to go.
And
The
assuming
second,
that your database is big.
right, exactly. And so we need to. We'll have another one that we got to do here, and this has to do with instead
Membership.
the membership.
Yeah.
And we've got some caveats here because the approach that we're taking in this case, we'd actually lose our membership database.
Yeah.
So without a good strategy to help users migrate.
Exactly.
For example, auto provisioning during the transfer process, some way to bring them over, then you're going to lose your user database. So
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
note.
Let's go back to the slide.
Right.
Yeah. So the membership database is ASP.NET DB.MDF. It is in the app data folder of the web application. So, and we'll be using Microsoft ASP.NET Universal Providers to migrate or to enable membership capabilities into our future state application. So
Okay.
you can just install universal providers using NuGet package. So
Right.
let's move to the next one. Yeah, so just install that package, and when you install that package, there will be some XML elements that are created in your web.config automatically, right?
Okay.
So there is profile provider, there is membership provider, there is role manager, and then there is session state manager. So
Session state is important. This doesn't have to do with necessarily our users as we might think of them from a membership perspective, but it has to do with where the session state is being stored,
Yep,
and this is
exactly.
part of our cloud strategy, right?
yeah, and if you see, I've changed the connection string name to point to the web.config, the database connection string, SQL Azure database connection string that we created, right, in the previous slide. So the music store entities, all of these elements are pointing to the music store entities, which is the connection string.
Right.
Right. So now your session state, role manager, membership, everything is pointing to the same Azure SQL database. Now it doesn't have to be this way, right? So if you detect in your testing that I want separate database for session management, separate for application, I would encourage you to do that, right?
Okay, so this is, we've done, all we have to do at this point is really run our application, and that's a matter of convention, right?
Yeah, so now the tables get created, and you have to make sure that the tables schema match, right? Because it doesn't out of the box, because the membership provider, the original membership provider, legacy one, it creates a different schema, ASP_schema, right, for tables, and the new one is more of entity framework friendly, object oriented kind of schema.
Right.
Applications, artists. So memberships. Let's go to the next one. Publish the site by creating a website, and
So we use that drawer, we spin up a new compute website instance. We're going to use quick create in this case, and then just get a name reserved there.
yep, and then publish it. Using
Download
the
that published profile, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Use it. So inside of Visual Studio, we're going to import that publishing profile if we want to.
Yeah,
And we had a look
not
in.
ideally, right? So in the real world environment, you won't, but as a developer, I want to quickly migrate it and see whether it's working or not, right? So this is a check, this is a test, litmus test.
Exactly.
And I want to check it whether it's working or not. So this is the best way. You download the profile, quickly upload it, publish it in your dev environment, whether it's running or not. So let's go back to the slides, please.
And then we see that it's up and running, and away we go. So, hey,
We
there
just
we go.
moved the data tier out of the website. So
Exactly.
we migrated both of those databases. We moved the session object to the database. Not ideal, right? Ideally, you would use Windows Azure Shared Cache. but
Something that
it's a-
doesn't have to write to the database and cross those tiers each time,
So,
right?
but Windows Azure Shared Cache is in preview right now. So if you want to take this live, you have to think twice. right?
Okay, so let's get back to our checklist here for
Yeah.
the pre-flight kind of thing. And the next thing on our list, we've tackled the databases, we've tackled session management as part of the database step. And now we're going to move into Elasticsearch and adding this new feature inside of our site.
Yep.
And the concept here is pretty straightforward. I think
It's the search concept, right? It's a very high-level search concept, how search works. So there is a crawler that crawls different data sources, right? It can be a database. In our case, it's a database. Then it ingests that data into an index based on the schema that you specify. Now, in case of Elasticsearch, you specify JSON schema. So it's called schemaless, but you can be more specific also. And then once it's indexed, so index is like a database, right? It's called an inverted index, but it's basically a database which can be queried, right? So now you have a query service or query API that other applications can access to get that data out of the index. So
But this is living over here. This is living on the index side of things and not over in the database, right?
yeah, so your database is free now, right?
Okay,
so the
so-
moment you move search data out of, so that database is just for crawling.
Right.
So you're crawling that database, data in the database and indexing it. So the database is just a data source here.
Right, it has to do with that crawler now,
Exactly.
and it's not the other relationship where we're going from the website each time for the stuff that rarely changes, right? We
Absolutely.
can index and make available the more popular things or the more frequently accessed
Absolutely.
things.
So let's go to the next slide, please.
Sure. A couple of concepts.
So we won't cover Elasticsearch concepts here, but there are some great tutorials, great blogs about how to use Elasticsearch. It runs great on Windows Azure. So, and I have it deployed live on Windows Azure. The Music Store website is also live on Windows Azure. You can dial in using www.icontinuous.com because it has a custom domain name also.
Right.
And in that website, the search is delivered by Elasticsearch. So we have moved the browse and search functionality out of the data source from the database and moved into Elasticsearch. So
Right.
let's go to the next slide. So this is how the architecture is. So basically, this is the ingestion process. So basically, your music store website takes these albums and ingests it into the index, Elasticsearch index, using Elasticsearch API. So Elasticsearch provides a .NET API also. There are several of them. My favorite one is the Nest API, which is it's a strongly named API.
And how do you get that? What's the easiest way to get that?
It's through NuGet.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Yes, easy.
You get it and you will get it. So that was cheap.
That was so cheesy. That was awesome. It's pure developer cheese. Get it and you'll get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then once the data is indexed, once the albums are indexed, then you can just search using the query API. Right? So now you're basically running your search off of Elasticsearch, and your database is serving only the transactions and business objects that are required. And relational databases are typically the weaker link in terms of scalability in the cloud, right? Because they are not designed for the cloud from scratch. That's why a lot of people are moving to your NoSQL environments. And Elasticsearch is kind of a NoSQL environment, right? So you query it, you get results as JSON, and that's the return result of your database query.
Right.
Right, and then you display that result. Now, from a front-end user experience perspective, it doesn't matter where it is coming from.
Exactly.
Whether it's a database or Elasticsearch.
So you have a demo prepared for us here. Can we have a look and see how this stuff
Yeah,
starts
so
to work?
I'll go over
Okay.
how things are running, and I already mentioned. Let's go to the demo environment, please. Yeah. So I already mentioned you can look at this website, iContinuous.com, or you can look at, let me go to the right subscription. So in virtual machines, right? So I have two virtual machines. So these two are dedicated to Elasticsearch. So these two are running as clusters, right? And I've ingested albums, the albums from the website. These are music albums from the website into this Elasticsearch index, and there is a tool to access that index. So the Elasticsearch vm.cloudapp.net :9200 is the magic port for accessing Elasticsearch API, and plugin.head gives you the environment, how the environment is running, what's the health of the environment, right? So there are two machines, and these are the shards of the cluster, right, on the same machine, and those are replicated automatically into another VM. So I can bring one down and the search will keep on functioning, and I can add as many nodes as possible. It just scales automatically.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's the beauty, because it's designed for the cloud from scratch.
Right.
Now if I go to browse, you will see the index itself, how it is stored. So if you see music store, the name and all these things, right, about each object. Now, if you go back to the music store website, you click. Now you have to trust me here, right? So because it's coming from me.
Yeah, like I mean, we
I showed
can't-
you the index.
Yeah.
I showed you the VMs, and when I click these browse functions here, or the browse links here, these objects or these UI elements, these albums, are delivered from Elasticsearch.
Beautiful.
Right, and you can even add search functionality here. You can add a search box to enhance the UI, and deliver the objects from search. Now, to further validate what I'm doing, so there is some code also, right? So if you go to the models, controller, right? So in the store controller.
Okay, let's zoom in there so we can see nice and big.
Plus, okay,
There you go.
So these are the good old entities, right? And then this is the Elasticsearch client. I'm reading the Elasticsearch name setting from the configuration, and then setting the default index name, which is the MVC music. We saw it in the index. And then in browse, I've commented the previous one, and then adding one more Elasticsearch here. So there was database before here, if you see here. storedb.getAlbums.
Right, it's basically pulling out all of the genres and
Yeah.
then all the titles related to the genre. Here instead, you're going to that indexed version of the database inside of your Elastic client, the Elastic
Elasticsearch
client,
Yeah.
and then pulling
And
that
then
out
I'm
that way.
creating a model and just passing it to the view.
Excellent.
Right?
Okay.
Similarly, search, and then in store controller, I've added index also, right? So how did I ingest all this data, right? So I took a poor man's approach, right? Typically there will be a crawler, or you would index that data when the object is created, right? When an album is created by the administrator, you would quickly index it. Or in the bulk scenario, you can run a crawler, which will crawl the database and index the data. Right? In this case, I've added that to the admin functionality itself. Right? So I added a function called reindex, right? And then you can just call client.index function. So this is the key function here. Right? So I initialize the API, get all the Elasticsearch configuration environment, configuration variables, and then you just index it, iterate over all the albums. So you can just type icontinuous.com/reindex, and it will index the data into this Elasticsearch index.
Otherwise, you would want to, for example, as you're creating a new genre or adding albums, you would want to make that part of those controller actions, or at least calling a repository or out to something that would do it. Okay, so we've kind of seen how that's working a little bit now. I think what we could probably do is pop back to our little checklist that we're doing here, and we had some goals, and Elasticsearch was one of them. I know as well that.
So one point I want to make is this Elasticsearch integration of MVC Music is based on Joel Abramson's blog. Right?
Okay.
So I really loved that blog, and I implemented the instructions given on the blog.
So download the slide deck. It's got the links in there. Dive into that. There's also some links from dynamicdeploy.com, which allows you to spin up some servers, some instances, some clusters pretty easily. So okay, that's good. But we're going to go back and look at our list here now. And Elasticsearch is marked off. We've got session and database already tackled. We want to look at analytics really quickly here and see what we can do with Piwik.
So I have a Piwik VM running. So this is how you deploy Piwik using Dynamic Deploy. It's free, and Piwik is an open source analytics engine, I would say website.
Okay.
Right? So which captures analytics. It hands you a JavaScript that you can embed in your web app, and then you can start tracking your users, right? So.
Excellent. And there's a little bit of code that we need to put in here. There's a lot going on in here. Let me see if I can try and break this down a little bit. I see I've got a script tag up here. What this looks to be doing is pulling down some of the base URL. This is setting up a base URL and then actually pulling out the JavaScript that we need in order to set up some of our analytics. Then I see also in here the next little block of script which says, okay, well, now that I've got the tracker going, or I get my tracker from that base URL, it's calling this PHP endpoint. We're going to track our page view. We're going to enable the link tracking, catch errors. All of that's going to get logged. And then as a fail-safe, if that user doesn't support the JavaScript, then we've got this, this best effort kind of approach where it's just at least going to pull down an image, border 0, alt nothing, and it's probably just a single pixel, nothing to it kind of thing. But we've got this image source that's going to pull down, and actually it's just a PHP endpoint anyways.
Yep, exactly.
So we'll get some basic browser information about it, even if it's not as rich as some of the other things that we can do.
It's a web endpoint, right?
Right.
So, and then what I did is I just copied this snippet. If you can focus on the demo environment.
We'll pop over to the demo environment again and have a look at what you had to do inside of your page there.
Yeah, so in layout.chtml, I just copied that
and just pasted in. Just zoom in a little bit there so we can see that.
Ready.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is exactly the same script that was shown in the PowerPoint. So we didn't Photoshop that.
No, no. That's actually real stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so then once you add this, once you deploy, once users start hitting that website, then I can go to the Piwik VM. So if you say it's running piwikvm.cloudapp.net, right? And then I can track the pages, right? How are things being used, right? If you see here, it shows how many visits, how many page views, and then you can you can drill down deeper also if you have e-commerce stuff in there, if you have any actions, if you have visitors log, all this gets captured.
You can set goals. For example, when somebody comes to your website, do they go to the sign up?
Yeah.
And if they go to the sign up, do they actually complete registration? Track that as a goal and see why users aren't actually
And
signing
this is
off.
intelligence, right? So
Right.
basically you're capturing the intelligence and basically finding out what your users are doing.
Exactly.
Right, on your website. And accordingly you can start improving your website, right? Put diapers next to the beer inside, right? Right. So
Perfect. Yeah, there's a lot of jokes we could go with. We could go there. Anyways, the custom analytics, that was the last piece. Back to our idea of the things that we wanted to cover as part of our migration activities. We've got that one checked off as well. So hey, we're modern now, right?
yeah, so
we're
the
there.
music store is up. You can access it http www.icontinuous.com. The site is
Excellent.
there, delivered by Elasticsearch. Search and browse is delivered by Elasticsearch.
Now we have a lot more that we wanted to cover as far as this goes. As far as dynamic deploy, we were going to walk through this as well.
Yep.
But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, pull down the slide deck as best you can.
It's all about the trade-off, right?
Right.
So we are making a decision that we won't cover the migration of dynamic deploy, or the migration environment, but the content will be available.
Right.
Instead, we'll spend more time on the next module,
Right,
which
showing
is the
some
lightning
samples.
round.
Right, exactly. But we did cover off a few things. So we talked about that website capability model, and there's a wealth of information that you can pull out of your existing website and figure out what you need to do in order to go to the cloud. We also actually helped walk through an instance of migrating Music Store to Windows Azure websites. That's an important thing. We talked about the databases themselves, the Elasticsearch support, adding the feature of Piwik,
Piwik.
Yeah, that word, that open source project. And then in the slide deck, as well as in your book, I believe there's a complete walkthrough on
both of
migrating.
these, both
Right,
of these. So-
exactly. Okay, and that involves everything from the session management and the cache management and all of those things as well. So we're going to take another 10-minute break here, and we're going to get as quickly as possible into our final module, where we're going to look at what we think are going to be some of the more important, exciting things that you want
The
to.
lightning round. We'll cover as much ground as possible.
As we can,
right?
yeah, we'll do our best. We got about half an
And
hour
it's going
after
to be
the break
fast.
here,
It's going to be fast because this is the last module.
Yes,
And it's going to be fast.
It's going to be fast. Stay tuned to have your mind, just put your hands on the back of your head in case your brain tries to blow out the back. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye.